The images you see on your screen were recorded by surveillance cameras installed in the city of León, in the Mexican state of Guanajuato. They show the final movements of a 12-year-old boy named Mateo, who disappeared without a trace shortly after leaving school. The desperate search for the child shocked the entire country and received an unprecedented response on social media, where diverse versions of what might have happened to him began to spread. According to available information, Mateo Santiago Ramirez was born on October 18, 2012. He was the second child of his parents, Father Gerardo Ramirez and Mother Maria Teresa Martinez, also known as Maritor. Unfortunately, not many details are available about the boy's early years. All that is known is that he grew up with his parents, his brother Angel, and his sister Camila. The Ramirez Martinez family was very happy, and they described Mateo as a friendly, open, and bright child. Around July or August, they moved to a quiet village in the Chapelita neighborhood, a suburb of León. Shortly after the move, Mateo began his year of middle school. Since it was quite far from his home, he had to take the bus. Mateo's parents described him as an incredibly responsible child who never missed class. In other words, he had a strict daily routine, which he usually followed to the smallest detail. Although Mateo hadn't lived in the area long, by the beginning of 2025, almost all the locals knew him, and they all saw him as a friendly, responsible, and polite boy who never got into trouble. Mateo also had a good reputation at school, and as far as I know, he even developed a close relationship with one of his female classmates. Mateo often walked her home, which is why the other classmates considered them a couple. Overall, it was fair to say that he led a happy and carefree life, just like any other boy his age. But on Tuesday, February 4, 2025, everything changed fundamentally. According to Mateo's parents, the morning began as usual. They went to work, and he went to school. Mateo usually came home at 11:30 a.m. At that time, his mother, Maria Teresa, also returned from work to pick him up from school. However, as I mentioned before, everything went differently that day, and Mateo didn't come home at his usual time. In the first few minutes of his absence, Maria Teresa tried to calm herself down. She thought he was probably out with his girlfriend, doing his homework at school, or that his bus was simply late. But as so often happens, the minutes passed, and Maria Teresa began to worry about her son. When it was 3:00 p.m., and there was still no news from Mateo, she persistently started calling him on his cell phone, but her calls went unanswered. At the same time, the woman sent her son several messages via a messenger service, but these apps only work when there is an internet connection, and Maria Teresa, seeing that the messages simply weren't reaching her son, assumed he had run out of credit. Since she was seriously worried, the woman informed her husband that the boy hadn't come home. After this call, the mood in the house became even more anxious. When Gerardo returned from work, he decided to go out into the street and look for his son. First, the man asked neighbors and friends, concluding that Mateo had simply met an acquaintance and forgot to tell his parents that he would be a little later than usual. At that time, the boy's parents only had his last location, which they had determined with the help of a special tracking app. This led them to one of the city streets where Mateo didn't usually go. The app also showed that his cell phone was not hidden in a house or building but was lying directly on the street. However, when the boy's parents arrived at this location, they could find nothing. Finally, they decided to contact the authorities and post information about their son's disappearance on social media. This was apparently done so that all their acquaintances would learn about Mateo's disappearance at the same time, and could potentially help them in the search. After some time, with the help of friends and relatives, they searched the area again, questioning residents to find out if anyone had seen Mateo. Around the same time, Maria Teresa began to relive the last few hours she had spent with her son. For some reason, she came to the conclusion that they might have argued, and that was why Mateo didn't want to return home. But no matter how hard the woman searched, for a reason for their possible argument. She couldn't find one. It is known that on the same day, the authorities activated the Amber Alert system, which informed all other law enforcement officers about the disappearance of 12-year-old Mateo. In this report, he was described as a boy with straight black hair, brown eyes, and a large, round birthmark on his hip. It was also stated that he was about 130 meters tall and wore a school uniform, white sneakers, and a burgundy jacket. However, this information was later corrected, and it was reported that Mateo was taller than initially stated and that his jacket was pink, not red. As expected, the first night after Mateo's disappearance was full of sorrow and uncertainty for his parents. In the early morning of February 5, they, along with their neighbors, gathered in small groups to continue the search. It is important to note that they were later joined by a large number of people who knew neither the family nor Mateo. They all walked through the streets calling the boy's name, urging him to return home, and distributed leaflets with information about the boy to everyone they met, asking them to call the police if they learned anything. In addition, people posted flyers on poles, trees, and the facades of homes and businesses in the area. Mateo's classmates also joined the search, trying to draw as much attention to the case as possible. The administration of the school Mateo attended, as well as other children, not only supported the search, but also posted information about his disappearance inside the school. Indeed, by this time, Mateo's case had not only garnered significant attention on social media, where literally hundreds of people shared his photos, but had also attracted the attention of local and national media, which supported his family's appeal for the child's return alive and unharmed. However, at this point, there were still no clues or traces of the boy. Despite the lack of results, Mateo's relatives and the police continued to search the streets and review surveillance videos. It is important to note that, although the media revealed quite a few details about the boy's disappearance, the local authorities asked his relatives not to publish the most important information available at the time. I suspect they wanted a certain degree of secrecy so that the investigation would run as smoothly and effectively as possible. After a few days, it was revealed that the authorities had found Mateo in the surveillance camera footage. This wasn't really surprising, since many images had been analyzed, not only from the cameras near Mateo's school, but also from other cameras along the entire route he usually took home. Thanks to these images, it was determined that on the day of his disappearance, he had left school with his girlfriend, as usual. I already told you that Mateo always accompanied her home, and this information was also confirmed by a taco vendor who usually stood on the corner next to their house. The man said he remembered Mateo because he walked past his shop every day with his girlfriend. According to him, he saw the teenagers together that day, and they seemed perfectly normal. The cameras then filmed the moment Mateo got off the bus. It was the same means of transport the boy usually took home, but for some reason, Mateo didn't get off at his usual stop. According to authorities, he did so to visit Christian Augusto Giaffetta GT Mez, a 34-year-old man who worked as a doctor. According to some reports, Mateo got into a white van belonging to Christian, which was parked in front of a small 2-story building, and shortly after, the trail was lost. You've probably been wondering who this Christian is and what his relationship to Mateo was. Well, it is known that he worked as a doctor and had a medical license. In 2009, Christian graduated from a local chemistry laboratory and in 2017 from the Medical University of León. He then began treating patients near Mateo's house, specializing in the treatment of people with diabetes. At the same time, it was known that Christian also advertised his services through a so-called Mexican Comprehensive Care Association. Practically at the beginning of the investigation, some media outlets reported that Mateo spent a lot of time with this man, helping him with various minor matters. However, the boy's parents denied this. They stated that their son had never been to his office and that he didn't have a particularly close relationship with Christian. According to them, The boy always had the same daily routine, so it seemed strange that he even had time to help a man he barely knew. The investigation continued, however, and Christian became the prime suspect in the case. The authorities then contacted the man and asked him then to come to the police station to show them the surveillance camera footage installed in his office and to answer a few questions. Although Christian had originally agreed to attend the meeting, he did not show up. For this reason, the authorities had to go to his office themselves, but were unable to locate him because Christian was no longer there. In fact, the only person they were able to speak with was the man's mother, whose identity was later withheld. The woman said she couldn't show them the camera footage because it had long since stopped working. Eventually, the authorities left the scene quietly, but continued their investigation into Christian, as he remained the prime suspect in Mateo's disappearance. While the investigation continued, Mateo's parents, relatives, and friends participated in a vigil of sorts. They lit candles and said prayers in the hope that the boy would soon be found alive and unharmed. Around the same time, surveillance camera footage surfaced online showing Mateo's last movements. Later, during their investigation, the authorities were able to determine that the boy, after getting into Christian's van, had been taken to another location in a neighboring district. After determining the address, the authorities went there to find out if the man was present and if he could clarify the situation to clear himself of any suspicion. Upon arrival, they found a small house and a gate locked with a padlock. Nevertheless, they did not leave, assuming that this was just a strategy by Christian to make it appear as if he was not at home. After a while, the authorities entered the house using tools to bypass the lock. There are two versions of what happened next. According to the first version, before the officers entered the house, Christian began screaming and saying that he was going to take his own life. According to the second version, the officers found a wounded man in the house. It is suspected that he first fired several shots toward the front door and then injured himself with his own pistol. By the time the first ambulance arrived at the scene, Christian already had multiple injuries. However, his life was not in danger. The man was conscious and was able to answer the authorities' questions. He confessed to the kidnapping, rape, and subsequent murder of Mateo. Christian also told the authorities the exact location where they could find the boy's body. The man was then taken to the hospital and placed under constant police surveillance to prevent possible attempts on his life by local residents. Based on Christian's information, the authorities began searching for Mateo's body. It was believed to be buried about 15 kilometers from the man's house. After a lengthy search, the authorities finally managed to locate the body of the 12-year-old boy. It was lying near a small concrete post, surrounded by bushes and covered with a thin layer of earth. As Christian later said, he simply hadn't managed to bury Mateo properly. After some time, the boy's body was taken to the coroner's office for an autopsy, and only then was it released to his parents. Judging by the bloodstains discovered at the site, Mateo may have died there. At that time, however, the authorities were still uncertain and therefore made no public statement. All that was known was that the police had cordoned off the area, awaiting the arrival of more qualified personnel from the Jalisco State Prosecutor's Office. Subsequently, numerous traces were found not only at that location, but also in Christian's office and his apartment. It was there that the key evidence was found that made it possible to establish that Mateo had originally been attacked at that very location. Shortly thereafter, the Guanajuato Attorney's Office issued an official statement announcing both the discovery of the boy's body and the further progress of the investigation. The statement also confirmed that Mateo's parents would receive all necessary psychological and financial support. This statement provoked mixed reactions from the public. This was particularly evident on social media, where literally hundreds of users condemned what happened to Mateo and demanded justice. However, the authorities also expressed their disapproval of the incident, promising that this crime would not go unpunished. Meanwhile, Some civil society organizations, primarily dedicated to protecting children, expressed their solidarity with the Ram Rez Martinez family and questioned the secrecy protocols followed by the authorities. In other words, they disliked the highly secretive nature of the investigation, which led people to speculate and develop their own theories about the nature and extent of the crime. Some of them, for example, said that the police officers who took Christian to the hospital had access to his cell phone and found a large number of photos of children. Although this has not been confirmed by the public prosecutor's office in any official statement, I decided to mention this, as it has been discussed repeatedly on social media. There was also much talk about at least one other person being involved in this case. However, the authorities stated that at this point, Christian was the only suspect. It should also be mentioned that there were some who wanted to exploit the situation for their own purposes and organized a fundraising campaign intended to help Mateo's parents and cover the costs of his funeral. The parents themselves, however, stated that they were not convinced of this, knew nothing about it, and advised all residents not to fall for these scams. Furthermore, it had been announced shortly before that the municipality would cover all major costs. It is known that Mateo's funeral took place with dozens of residents attending, including not only those who knew him personally, but also people who were simply affected by this tragedy. The next day, a special memorial service was held in the boy's memory, where he was honored with sincere words of love, white balloons, and flowers. On the same day, new information appeared in the media about the condition of Christian, who was still in the hospital. It was assumed that he would remain there until his condition stabilized. Meanwhile, local children's rights organizations issued another statement calling on the authorities to take decisive action against the man. On Wednesday, February 11, the public prosecutor's office announced that Christian's official arrest would take effect immediately after his discharge from the hospital. After some time, the man, guarded by numerous members of the National Guard and the city police, was taken to a social rehabilitation center. The very next day, the first court hearing in his case took place, in which he was officially charged with crimes against sexual integrity, kidnapping, and murder under aggravated circumstances. During the hearing, Christian's defense pointed out numerous violations by the authorities during his arrest and asked for additional time to gather as much evidence as possible to prove the man's innocence. Towards the end of the day, it was announced that the next hearing would be postponed until Monday, February 17. The legal representatives of Mateo's parents continued to insist that Christian must be held accountable for his actions. They also claimed that the boy never helped the man in his office, though for some reason they were unable to clarify exactly how their relationship came about. To date, the case has not progressed to a final verdict. The court has yet to decide what should happen to Christian. It is worth noting that new hypotheses about what really happened continue to emerge on social media, demonstrating that this horrific and painful case has had a profound impact on Mexican society as a whole. For now, all that remains is to hope that Mateo's parents receive justice and that the truths, which remain unknown, will finally come to light. Thanks for watching, and take care.